What's up, EFD squad? Today we've got an absolute banger for you. 10 players who absolutely ruled the World Cup. But before we start, why not click on the notification bell down there so you don't miss any more of our fantastic World Cup content. Anyway, let's go. 10. Arjen Robben. Now, the 2014 World Cup is mainly remembered for Germany's 7-1 mauling of host Brazil, the glamorous performances of James Rodriguez, and that Van Persie header. But it was another Dutchman who arguably had the biggest impact on the tournament. Arjen Robben flew to South America off the back of one of his most productive seasons at Bayern Munich, and carried on his electric form in Louis van Gaal's makeshift Netherlands side. He may have only scored in the opening 2 games, but all 3 goals were of the highest quality. And en route to the semi-finals, the man of glass was named man of the match 5 times in 7 appearances. Pretty damn good. He tore apart the defence of world champion Spain almost single-handedly and repeated the feat against Chile and Mexico. And although his diving antics in that last 16 tie overshadowed his performances for some, we have no doubt that had the Netherlands made it to the final instead of Argentina, it would have been Robben and not Messi who took home the golden ball. 9. Roberto Baggio. Like Arjen Robben, Roberto Baggio never got his hands on the World Cup, but he came mighty close in 1994 when his performances for Italy earned him a place in the history books. Despite having Milan legend Arrigo Sacchi in the dugout, the Azzurri initially struggled in the States, losing to Ireland and scraping into the knockouts by a single point. But once they were in the last 16, Baggio came to life, scoring both goals as his team came back to beat Nigeria in extra time, before scoring another late winner against Spain in the quarters and grabbing a brace to overcome a Stoichkov-inspired Bulgaria in the semis. But of course, we all know what happened in the final against Brazil. It came to penalties and the divine ponytail skied the decisive one over the bar. Heartbreaking. But even after 24 years, Baggio continues to dominate folklore surrounding the '94 final. The most iconic image of the tournament is not of Brazil winning it, but of the Italian looking dejected at the spot. 8. Pelé. Now, we might give him a fair bit of stick here on EFD, but even we cannot deny that Pelé is one of the most important figures in World Cup history. The Brazilian was the first wonder kid to truly get the globe on their feet after football became widely televised in the 1950s, ripping it up on the biggest stage of all at just 17 years old. Pelé was a revelation at the 1958 tournament and set a total of 4 records that still somehow stand to this day. Youngest scorer at a World Cup, youngest player to score a hat-trick at a World Cup, youngest player to appear in a final, and youngest scorer in a final. Unbelievable. A player who surpassed the boundaries of logic according to Johan Cruyff, Pelé also remains the only man to have won the tournament 3 times, doing so again in 1962 and 1970. The poster boy for the sport as it's entered the modern age. 7. Garrincha. But the real star of the 1962 World Cup was Pelé's teammate Garrincha. The two of them were invaluable assets for the Seleção, who went completely unbeaten when the pair were on the pitch together. But at the tournament in Chile, the bent-legged angel had to pick up the pieces after his fellow talisman was injured in just the 2nd game. A nightmare for defences throughout the competition, Garrincha's crowning moment came in the quarter-finals as he ripped apart a strong England side with his unearthly dribbling and added 2 goals to put them to bed 3-1. It was the same story in Brazil's semi against the hosts, and he was unsurprisingly named the tournament's best player, an astounding feat considering he had battled alcoholism and had run over his own father in the years preceding. 6. Walter Zenga. When you think of all-time great international keepers, the usual names crop up: Gianluigi Buffon, Iker Casillas, Gordon Banks, Dino Zoff, etc. But Italy's Walter Zenga achieved something none of those stoppers could at a World Cup. One of football's more interesting characters, Zenga's career has seen him act in Italian soap operas and manage teams in America, Romania and the United Arab Emirates. But he is most remembered for his time between the sticks at boyhood club Inter Milan and being his country's #1 when they hosted the world's biggest competition in 1990. While Salvatore Schillaci took all of the plaudits, scoring in all but one of the Azzurri's 7 games, Zenga was totally dominant at the other end, not conceding a goal until the semi-finals, meaning he went 517 minutes without having to pick the ball out of his net, a record that still stands. 5. Johan Cruyff. Amazingly, 3 of our first 5 entries never got their hands on the World Cup, and Johan Cruyff carries on the trend. Part of a Netherlands team famously remembered as the greatest side to have never won the competition, Cruyff was the on-field figurehead for the footballing revolution of the early 1970s. The Oranje captain went into the 74 competition in West Germany, having won 3 European Cups in the previous 3 years with his beloved Ajax, and with former Lancieri coach Rinus Michels instated in the dugout, the controls were set for total football domination. Cruyff was already used to being a star. He'd even had a film made about him 2 years earlier, and with the successful first season at new club Barcelona under his belt, his sublime attacking ability was no secret. On their way to the final, the Netherlands trounced both Argentina and world champions Brazil, with El Salvador scoring 3 times over those 2 matches. Meanwhile, their 0-0 stalemate with Sweden earlier in the tournament had been lit up by the first global viewing of the Cruyff turn. But it wasn't to be in the final against the hosts, with referee Jack Taylor later admitting he had made a mistake in gifting West Germany the penalty which ultimately changed the game. However, Cruyff remains the icon of the 74 World Cup, and his legacy will live on forever. 4. Miroslav Klose.
So, nearly there guys, but if you've had enough at this point, why don't you check out Stat Wars, where we do battle over your football-related trivia by clicking the I button just above. And as ever guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.
Now, this candidate may not have lit up any one World Cup, but his performances over 4 of them make him more than worthy on a place in this list. Although he may not have had the glittering club career many of his German counterparts enjoyed, Miroslav Klose always saved his best form for the national team, and especially at major tournaments. Klose's first World Cup appearance came back in 2002, and he won the Silver Boot as Die Mannschaft came runners-up to the Brazil of Ronaldo, Rivaldo and Ronaldinho. He then won the Golden Boot as Germany hosted the tournament 4 years later, as they reached the semis of that edition and the one after, before finally getting their hands on the trophy in Brazil. That means that aside from Euro 2004, where he was hardly used due to fitness issues, the former Bayern and Lazio man reached at least the semi-finals of each international tournament he competed in. A frankly ridiculous achievement. His strike in the 7-1 thumping of Brazil also made him the all-time World Cup top scorer with 16 goals, ahead of the likes of R9, Gerd Müller, David Villa, Pele and the next guy we're about to talk about. 3. Just Fontaine. Just 4th on the list of all-time top scorers behind Klose is Just Fontaine, but somehow he managed to notch up just 3 less than the German in a quarter of the games, all in one tournament. We've already spoken about how Pelé lit up the 1958 World Cup, but France's goal-scoring phenomenon was also busy setting records in Sweden. The Moroccan-born marksman bagged 2 hat-tricks, netting 4 in the 3rd-place playoff, and scored in all 6 of his games. But unfortunately for Fontaine, the glory days wouldn't last for long. 4 years later, he retired at just 28 due to recurring injuries and ended his career with a total of 289 goals for club and country. 2. Diego Maradona. But when it comes to an individual dragging his team to World Cup glory, nothing comes close to Diego Maradona's 1986 adventure. Argentina entered the World Cup in Mexico in disarray, with manager Carlos Bilardo escaping the sack by the skin of his teeth after his regimented tactical approach ruffled feathers in the Argentina hierarchy. But the decision to make the unpopular Maradona captain and give him a free role between midfield and attack would prove a fruitful gamble. An otherwise average Albiceleste team swept all in their path, and everything went through El Diego, with only Gary Lineker scoring more than the Napoli man. And even in his quietest game, which was coincidentally the final where he was man-marked by Lothar Matthäus, he was still instrumental in all 3 of the team's goals. By repaying his manager's faith in him, he had silenced all the doubters back home. 1. Zinedine Zidane. Zinedine Zidane was a big game player throughout his career, and the 1998 and 2006 World Cups were no exception. He was the defining player of both tournaments, even though he managed to get sent off at both. Luckily for Les Bleus, he was back in time for the 98 quarter-finals, and although they relied on the unlikely sources of Laurent Blanc and Lilian Thuram for goals in the knockouts, Zidane remained the creative mastermind before unleashing hell on Brazil in the final to bring glory for the hosts. And it was the same story 8 years later, as Zizou once again tore apart the defending champions, this time in the quarter-finals. Those 4 weeks in Germany may well be the finest of the Frenchman's career, and even when it all went tits up in the final, he still provided us with the most iconic image in World Cup history. So those were our 10 players who dominated the World Cup, But who do you think we should have included instead? We're sure we've missed some out. Beckenbauer springs to mind just now. But if you've enjoyed this, why not go and check out all the rest of our great World Cup content? And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.